You find the absolute best-looking fallen tree on the entire lake. It has deep water nearby, it has thick branches, it practically screams giant fish. You make the perfect cast, expecting an immediate strike, and you get absolutely nothing, not even a nibble. Sound familiar? I am willing to bet it happens to you every single spring. But here is a reality check that is going to sting a little bit. That perfect-looking spot you just spent 30 minutes dissecting, it is completely empty, and it is empty for a very good reason. Today, we are going to expose a massive early spring fishing illusion. I am going to show you exactly why the prettiest cover on the lake is actually a total wasteland right now, and why everything you have been told about fishing visible structure in March and April might be completely backward. By the end of this video, you will have a serious realization about why your live well is empty. So, before we get into it, answer me this. How many times have you blamed your lure when a beautiful spot did not produce? Let us get into the truth. Let us set the stage here. Early spring is the most frustrating time of the year for a massive percentage of anglers. We have all spent the entire winter sitting in the house, dreaming about feeling that heavy thump on the end of the line. We read the old magazines, we listen to the old-timers at the bait shop, and the advice is always exactly the same. They tell you to go find shallow wood, find the laydowns and pound them until your arm falls off. It is an incredibly stubborn habit. We do it year after year because, honestly, it is human nature to fish what our eyes can actually see. We look at a beautiful stump, and our brain tells us a fish just has to be there. But those classic rules were written for a completely different set of conditions. We ignore the cold reality of water temperature and fish biology, opting instead to trust a decade-old method that simply does not work when the water is barely in the mid-40s. We are essentially fishing memories instead of fishing the current conditions. Let us talk about the visual trap of perfect cover. You are out on the water, the sun is just coming up over the horizon, the air is still crisp and your hands are freezing. You idle into a quiet cove and you see it. The most beautiful, tangled mess of fallen oak trees sitting right on the bank. It looks like something out of a fishing magazine. You can almost see the giant bass waiting in ambush. You tie on your favorite jig, make a completely silent pitch right into the heart of that timber, and you wait. You feel every branch. You anticipate that aggressive thump, but nothing happens. You cast again, hitting a different angle. Still nothing. You just spent 20 minutes dissecting a piece of cover that should have produced the bite of a lifetime. The reality is, your eyes are lying to you. In early spring, what looks good to a human standing on the deck of a boat means absolutely nothing to a cold-blooded creature living under the surface. We are so conditioned to throw our baits at whatever looks pretty, but visual appeal is the biggest scam in early spring fishing. That perfect tree is just a ghost town, and understanding why it is completely empty is the very first step to actually catching fish right now. Now we need to discuss the temperature factor. Imagine jumping out of a warm bed and walking barefoot onto a freezing concrete driveway. You would not stand there very long. Fish are dealing with a similar shock in the early spring mornings. That beautiful shallow structure you are casting at first thing in the morning is soaking in the absolute coldest water in the entire lake. Overnight temperatures drop significantly in early spring, and that shallow water loses its heat incredibly fast. The fish know this. They are cold-blooded, which means their body temperature is exactly the same as their environment. Sitting in 2 feet of freezing water around a pretty log makes zero sense for them from a survival standpoint. It slows their metabolism to a crawl and makes them vulnerable. So while you are shivering on the boat deck, casting at that shallow timber at dawn, the fish are nowhere near it. They have retreated to areas where the temperature is more stable. Fishing shallow wood before the sun has had a chance to do its job is one of the most common ways to waste your best morning hours. Let us break down the biology of these early spring fish. This is where we need to throw away the grandpa myth that fish are always hungry and always aggressive. In water that is hovering around 45 degrees, a fish is practically in a state of suspended animation. Their heart rate is slow, their digestion takes days instead of hours. Because of this, they are not going to expend precious energy fighting to stay positioned in shallow, unstable water just because there is a nice-looking stump there. They do not care about the architecture of the wood. They care about comfort and energy conservation. When they do decide to eat, it is going to be a very short, highly calculated feeding window. They are not going to cruise around an entire laydown looking for a snack. They are going to position themselves perfectly in areas that require the absolute minimum amount of fin movement. If that perfect-looking structure requires them to fight a slight wind current or deal with fluctuating temperatures, they will simply abandon it completely. Biology dictates their location, not the scenic view. Let us look at the deep water safety net. If they are not sitting in the shallow wood, where are they? Picture a steep drop-off just 50 yards away from that beautiful shoreline structure. While you are pounding the bank, the smart money is actually sitting near the bottom of that drop-off. In early spring, deep water is the ultimate comfort zone for a fish. It provides a stable temperature environment that does not fluctuate wildly when a cold front pushes through or the night air drops below freezing. The fish will suspend right off the edge of these drop-offs, using them as an elevator. They wait in the deeper, more stable water, just biding their time. When the conditions are absolutely perfect, they will slide up vertically to feed and then slide right back down into the safety of the depths. If that perfect-looking laydown does not have a steep contour or a deep water sanctuary directly next to it, it is virtually guaranteed to be totally empty. A pretty log on a massive, flat, shallow plateau is a completely dead zone in the early spring months. We really need to talk about breaking the old-timers myth regarding permanent residence. There is this old-school belief that every good piece of structure has a big resident fish living on it year-round. You hear guys at the tackle shops swear that old Big Mouth lives under that one specific dock every day of the year. This is a complete myth, especially in the early spring. Fish are highly nomadic during the pre-spawn period. They are completely focused on transitioning from their wintering holes to their spawning grounds. They use structure entirely differently right now than they do in the summer. In July, a fish might live in a laydown to escape the beating sun, but in early spring they only use structure as a temporary pit stop on a much longer journey. If you are fishing a perfect-looking spot that is located nowhere near a natural migration route, you are fishing a hotel that has no roads leading to it. It does not matter how nice the accommodations are, nobody's going to check in. You have to stop looking at cover as a permanent home. Transition zones are the secret highways you are completely ignoring. Imagine driving on a cross-country road trip. You do not stop your car randomly in the middle of a field. You stop at rest areas along the major interstate highway. Fish do the exact same thing in early spring. They are moving out of the main lake basin and heading toward the shallow bays where they will eventually spawn. They use underwater highways to get there. These highways are usually creek channels, ditches, or steep rocky banks. Secondary points leading into a cove are the ultimate rest stops. If that perfect-looking laydown is located at the very back of a shallow, flat cove in early March, the fish simply have not arrived there yet. They are still a quarter-mile away, staging on a rocky point near the mouth of the bay. You can cast at that beautiful backwater wood 1,000 times, but you are completely wasting your breath. You have to intercept them on the highway before you start knocking on the doors of their final destination. Let us factor in the water clarity and the dreaded mudline. Springtime brings heavy rains, and heavy rains bring muddy runoff. You might have found a gorgeous piece of structure, but if the water around it looks like chocolate milk, you are in trouble. In very cold, heavily muddy water, a fish feels nearly completely blind and incredibly uncomfortable. The silt clogs their gills, and the lack of visibility makes them highly anxious. They will actively flee from cold, muddy water and seek out areas with slightly better clarity. Often, you will find a distinct line in the water where the muddy runoff meets the clearer lake water. This is called a mudline. The fish will stack up on the clearer side of this line, using it as an ambush point. If your perfect piece of wood is buried deep inside the cold, muddy zone, it is absolutely barren. You have to pay attention to the watercolor just as much as the physical cover. Sometimes moving 50 yards down the bank to find 2 feet of visibility is the difference between catching nothing and having a record day. Wind direction is a hidden element that completely changes the game. A lot of guys hate fishing in the wind. They will specifically drive their boats to the calm, protected side of the lake to find a nice, quiet piece of wood to fish. It is comfortable for the angler, but it is a massive mistake. In early spring, the wind is your absolute best friend. A warm spring breeze blowing across the surface of the lake actually pushes the sun-warmed surface water toward the wind-blown shoreline. This means the water temperature on the windy bank can be 3 to 4 degrees warmer than the calm bank. In the fish world, a 4-degree jump is absolutely massive. It triggers their metabolism. It wakes up the bait fish. It turns the entire food chain on. So while you are sitting in a dead calm cove fishing a picture-perfect tree, the guys fishing the ugly, wind-battered rocks on the opposite side of the lake are hauling in giant fish. Never hide from the wind in early spring if you want to find active feeding fish. We have to talk about the bait fish migration. It is the most simple rule in nature. If there is no food, there are no predators. You can find the most intricate, beautiful, complex root system of a fallen tree in the entire state. But if the shad or the crawfish or the bluegill are not there, the predator fish are not going to be there either. Early in the spring, bait fish are extremely sensitive to temperature and sunlight. They tend to group up tightly and move together. They are not randomly scattered around every piece of cover like they are in the fall. If the bait is suspended out over open water 30 feet deep, the big fish are going to be right there with them, completely ignoring your perfect shallow structure. Before you even make your first cast at a piece of cover, you need to ask yourself why a fish would want to be there. If you do not see bait flicking on the surface, or if you do not mark bait on your electronics nearby, you need to keep the boat moving. Never fish memories, fish the food source. The afternoon sun phenomenon is a game changer that most guys completely miss. Remember that beautiful spot you fished at 7 in the morning and got 0 bites? You probably left it and swore you would never go back, but timing is absolutely everything in early spring. Fast forward to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun has been beating down on that exact same piece of shallow cover all day long. The dark wood has absorbed the heat. The water around it has warmed up significantly. Suddenly, what was a freezing, barren ghost town in the morning is now the most comfortable place on the lake. The bait fish move up to bask in the warmth, and the big predator fish follow them right up from the deep water. The spot did not change, but the timing did. A piece of perfect structure can be completely empty for 8 hours and then turn into an absolute gold mine for 45 minutes in the late afternoon. You have to learn to manage your time and revisit these spots when the conditions are actually right. You absolutely must understand the difference between holding structure and feeding structure. These are 2 completely different things in the mind of a cold water fish. Holding structure is usually a very dense, deep piece of cover where a fish can simply sit still and suspend and exert 0 energy. A deep brush pile in 20 feet of water is perfect holding cover. Feeding structure, on the other hand, is usually shallower, more open, and positioned near a drop-off where a fish can easily corner its prey. That beautiful, shallow, dense bush on the bank? It is trying to be holding cover, but it is in the wrong depth. It is trying to be feeding cover, but it is too dense for a sluggish cold water fish to maneuver through to catch bait. It ends up being the worst of both worlds. Fish want easy meals in the spring. They prefer isolated boulders or single stumps on a break line where they can make one quick lunge to eat, rather than chasing a minnow through a maze of shallow branches. Here is a hard truth to swallow. The ugly spots will consistently outproduce the pretty spots in early spring. We are naturally drawn to the obvious cover, the giant laydowns, the perfect docks, the massive weed beds, but everyone else on the lake is drawn to them too. Those spots get pounded with lures from sunrise to sunset. The fish get highly educated and extremely wary. Instead of fishing the obvious, you need to start looking for the subtle, ugly stuff. I am talking about a single basketball-sized rock sitting on a barren mudflat. I am talking about a tiny depression in the bottom that drops only 1 foot deeper than the surrounding area. I am talking about the remnants of an old stump that is completely submerged and invisible to the naked eye. These ugly, hidden spots are where the oldest, smartest fish go to avoid fishing pressure. They do not look like much on the surface, but underneath they provide the exact subtle advantages a fish needs. Stop looking for the calendar picture and start hunting for the subtle anomalies. Let us talk about the reality of the lake bottom, hard bottom versus soft bottom. Wood gets all the glory because we can see it, but the composition of the bottom beneath the wood is vastly more important. In early spring, hard bottom areas like chunk rock, gravel, or concrete boat ramps are absolute magnets for fish. Why? Because hard surfaces absorb and radiate solar heat much better than soft mud. Furthermore, crawfish, which are a primary early spring food source, emerge from hibernation in rocky areas, not in soft silt. If you have a beautiful piece of wood sitting on a completely barren, soft mud flat, it is highly likely to be empty. But if you find an average-looking piece of wood sitting on a transition line where gravel meets chunk rock, you have found a gold mine. The fish are there for the rock and the heat. The wood is just an added bonus. You have to start paying attention to what your jig or your crankbait is bumping into on the bottom, not just what is sticking up out of the water. It is time to completely redefine what the word perfect means right after ice out. A perfect spot in June is a shady tree overhanging the water. A perfect spot in early March looks entirely different. The true perfect early spring structure is a north shore bank, protected from the cold northern winds, exposed to the maximum amount of southern sunshine all day long. It needs to have deep water access within a single tail flip, and it needs to feature dark, heat-absorbing rocks. That is the true early spring perfection. If you find a spot that meets those criteria, it does not matter if there is barely a twig of wood there. The fish will be stacked on it. We have to reprogram our brains to stop looking for physical objects to cast at and start looking for environmental conditions that favor cold water survival. When you stop chasing the visual eye candy and start hunting for the warmest, most stable water, your catch rate is going to skyrocket. Let us explore the patience game and timing your approach. Let us say you actually find a spot that meets all the criteria. Good bottom, deep water nearby, afternoon sun. You pull up, make 3 casts, get nothing, and turn the trolling motor on high to leave. You just made a critical error. In cold water, fish do not react quickly. They are not going to chase a bait that zips by their face at 100 miles an hour. They will sit there and watch it pass. Sometimes a piece of structure holds a giant fish, but you have to actively convince them to open their mouth. This means making 10, maybe 15 casts to the exact same spot from slightly different angles. It means letting your bait sit perfectly still on the bottom for 10 or 15 seconds at a time. The quiet anticipation, the slow drag, the unbearable waiting. If you are fishing fast around early spring cover, you are leaving fish behind. The structure is not empty. Your presentation is just entirely too aggressive for their current metabolic state. Lure selection is another massive mistake guys make around empty-looking structure. You pull up to that perfect laydown and you tie on a massive, bulky jig with a huge kicking trailer or a loud, rattling crankbait. You want to make a lot of noise to wake them up, but in cold water, unnatural noise and massive profiles actually repel fish. Think about the natural bait in the water right now. The shad are moving slow and tight. The crawfish are lethargic and barely crawling. Nothing in nature is moving with violent, erratic action in 45-degree water. When you throw a hyper-aggressive bait at a piece of cover, the fish do not see food. They see an alien spaceship. They will slide away from the cover rather than strike. You need to downsize your profile. Use tight, wiggling baits. Use jigs with minimal action. Finesse is the name of the game. If you are throwing summer baits in early spring, every piece of structure you fish is going to seem completely empty. We need to talk about the electronics trap. Modern fish finders are incredible tools. but they can also be your absolute worst enemy if you let visual bias take over. You idle past a beautiful piece of structure, you look at your screen, and you do not see any fish arches, so you keep driving. You just made a huge mistake. In early spring, fish relate so tightly to cover and to the bottom that they become almost invisible on traditional sonar. A cold, lethargic fish will lay its belly directly on the rock or wedge itself deep into the forks of a stump. They do not swim around suspended over the cover where your electronics can easily paint a beautiful picture of them. They are glued to the floor. If the spot has the right water temperature, the right depth, and the right bottom composition, you have to stop staring at the screen and pick up your rod. Trust the environmental factors over your electronics. Do not let a blank screen talk you out of fishing the right conditions. Reading the current is a subtle factor that changes everything, and I am not just talking about fishing in a fast-moving river. Even in lakes and reservoirs, there is always some form of water movement. It could be from wind generation, or a power dam pulling water, or a tributary flowing in. Current positions fish on structure. In the summer, fish will sit right in the middle of the current to catch food floating by. But in early spring, fighting a current requires way too much energy. If your perfect piece of wood is taking the full force of a cold, incoming current, it will be completely void of life. The fish will move to the exact opposite side of that structure, or find an eddy just behind it where the water is perfectly still. They want the food to be brought to them, but they refuse to fight the flow to get it. You have to analyze the water movement before you cast. Fishing the wrong side of a log in the spring is exactly the same as fishing in a bathtub. The absolute danger of getting stuck in a rut. Memory fishing is the #1 cause of bad days on the water. You remember that one time, 5 years ago, when you caught a massive fish off a specific dock in the spring. So every single time you launch your boat, you drive straight to that dock. You fish it for an hour, get nothing, and get frustrated. You are completely ignoring the fact that 5 years ago, the water was 3 degrees warmer, the wind was blowing from the south, and the water was clear. Today the water is freezing, the wind is dead, and the water is muddy. The structure is the same, but the environment is totally different. You have to learn to treat every single day on the water as a brand new puzzle. Do not force the fish to be where you want them to be. Let the current daily conditions dictate where you cast. Running and gunning blindly to all your favorite pretty spots without analyzing the water temperature is a guaranteed recipe for a very quiet ride home. This brings us to the ultimate mindset shift for early spring success. You have to stop being a visual angler and start being an environmental angler. You have to put away the desire to cast at things that simply look fun to fish. It is hard. It requires a lot of discipline to drive right past a gorgeous, sprawling tree sitting in the shallows. But when you understand that the water temperature there is 42 degrees and there is no deep water access, you can confidently pass it by. You start looking for the boring, ugly, secondary points with dark rock. You start hunting for windblown banks in the late afternoon. You start focusing on the subtle transition zones. When you make this mental shift, you will stop wasting hours pounding dead water. You will realize that the structure was never broken, your understanding of the season was. Mastering early spring fishing is not about having the best lure. It is about having the discipline to fish where the fish actually are, not where you wish they were. So let us wrap this all up. The biggest takeaway here is that visual beauty on the water is a massive trap in the early spring. That perfect-looking spot is empty because it is too cold, too shallow, and disconnected from the deep water sanctuary that sluggish fish desperately need right now. The real plot twist is that the fish are completely ignoring your favorite cover and are probably sitting right behind you on an ugly, boring drop-off that you just drove over. When you stop fishing for the scenery and start fishing for water temperature and transition zones, your entire spring season is going to change. You will stop wasting the best parts of your day casting at ghosts. I really hope this changes how you look at the lake next time you launch the boat. Thank you so much for watching. If this video gave you a light bulb moment, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. Now I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and tell me, what is the most beautiful looking spot on your home lake that absolutely never produces a single fish for you? Let us figure out why it is empty together. See you on the water.